There are folks who live here today, and I'm seeing also in the Q&A, who want to stay here, who are maybe renting and they want to settle down here, right? They love Rosendale, they want to stay here. Or they have jobs nearby and they want to be able to keep affording the rent as rents keep on climbing higher. What are some, is zoning really the only answer here? Are there other things that could be done to prevent displacement of residents who are already here and want to stay, as well as welcome more residents to our community to make sure that we can share all the amenities that we have with folks who choose to live here? So I want to perhaps switch to Abdul Razak. Could you tell us a little bit of what other things are in the pipeline with the city? And Enrique, I know you've been involved with some of those efforts as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to start off, and Councilor Pepin can add as well. So one of the major projects that's been going on with the city is the creation of the Anti-Displacement Action Plan. So this is work that's been done by the Planning Advisory Council, which is an entity within the city that coordinates across departments, including the Planning Department, Office of Housing, and Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion, to name a few. And the primary tools that they've been working on, first, they've released an initial sentiment analysis of the concerns that people have expressed throughout different planning initiatives and processes in the past several years about displacement risk, not just displacement in terms of direct displacement of you might consider things like evictions, but also indirect displacement like the increase of costs in the general area or kind of more broadly that for both residential and commercial tenants. They also released a toolkit of what exists within the city that has already been kind of rolled out across the several years in response to existing displacement risk. And I think we've maybe spoken about this already, but the status quo of things is already producing displacement at a really high level. And so the city has been doing a lot of work to protect and support residents by way of legal services, financial services, in some instances, support in the acquisition of properties and preservation of some properties. And a lot of that has been provided in that toolkit that's available on the website for folks to see. And the next stage of that is the release of the full anti-displacement action plan, which would also lay out not only the kind of future on-looking work that the city is trying to do, but some gap analysis of spaces that we can continue doing work in that's in service of the variety of residents and commercial tenants who we see in the city. I would say overall, there's also things that are kind of beyond that plan or that have already been released and shared. Some may know that the mayor had the announcement of a fund for the preservation of affordable housing, and that is a very significant thing to have, and is also a representation of our partnerships beyond just resources from the city government or state government, but also pulling in partners like foundations in the hospital system and other sources there. And so that's another mechanism that's available. And while I can't speak on behalf of like the broader community of community development corporations that are across the city, those are extremely powerful partners in both identifying and connecting with residents who are in already existing affordable housing or who are interested in our owners in producing affordable housing and connecting with them. And so from a more kind of the standpoint of what individual actors, owners who are in this room and who are on this call can do is also if you are someone who wants to support this work of preventing displacement or providing opportunities of affordable space, there's also kind of these avenues of resources with the city and with partners like that to speak with to think about those things.
Enrique, do you have anything to add to that?
I do, because that is something that I very much prioritize whenever I'm having these conversations. Displacements, concerns of both residents and tenants of small businesses.
Right.
Starting with tenants, I think that we can really approach this in different ways where in the council, one, I actually filed a hearing order to talk more about the anti-displacement strategy that Abdul just brought up to make sure that there is a combination of both residential and small business focus.
Right.
We're trying to come up with new ideas in the city council where I'm working with my colleague from East Boston, Gabriela Coletta, to think about a good landlord tax exemption. So let's say a landlord hasn't increased this tenant's rent for the past few years. They haven't increased it for more, I'm just going to use an example, for more than 2% of the rent. All right, you are exempt from paying so and so amount of taxes. So kind of creating a good relationship with landlords in our city so that they're not incentivized to increase the rent. When it comes to small businesses, which is funny because that's the one I've actually been hearing about the most personally. Landlords, I encourage landlords to really have a good relationship with their tenants. And what's good about Rosendale Square specifically is that it's easy to know who the landlord is. We know that Anthony owns the building at the Square Group. We know that we know who owns 4198 Washington Street. We know who's about to own B'nai B'rith's building. So it's something unique to our square where I think they also understand the meaning of the small businesses in our corridor. And we have to ensure that this isn't just a conversation between the planning department and the zoning department or the office of housing, et cetera. We have to loop in the office of the small businesses as well. So that I'm going to use an example. 115 Belgrade Ave. We all know this as the Tali Auto Body Shop.
Right.
We were able to get ahead of this because obviously the tenant reached out to us saying, "Hey, I'm concerned about this proposed project in our neighborhood." Mind you, this is before Squares and Streets is implemented. So it's who knows what could have happened. I think it would have been better afterwards. The landlord never reached out to them until they reached out to us. So we were able to connect them to the small business department, and they actually came up with a good plan and an agreement with the landlord where if the project on 115 Belgrade Ave gets approved, he will give him a whole year to be able to stay there and also work with his lawyer to find a new location to relocate. Um, if he wants to. So there's different options there, but obviously my biggest priority at the moment is to make sure that nobody gets displaced. Or
Right.
if
Right.
if it comes to that there is an actual plan in place and that the tenants aren't left out in the dark. I'm excited that we're finally approaching this in a more proactive way, where for many years in my different roles as director of neighborhood services, as a former liaison many years ago, I would see where developer would just do a one-off project at this parcel, take the tenants, wouldn't take them into consideration, and there wouldn't be any plan for them. Where I feel like this is a great opportunity to actually have a plan and be more proactive with it.
I was wondering if Andrea or Burhan, from their experience, has had any kind of thoughts on that issue of displacement. And then Burhan, I see your hand as well.
There's different types of displacement that it's helpful to understand, right? Like the first is like you have a low income residents, maybe that's older, that's what we call naturally affordable. And I think that that's the place where there's the most um, trade-offs. And so I'll start with that and try to get to the other places then to start with the most difficult of the topic. I think there are a lot of older buildings that and being cheaper because they're the older building, at least what we're seeing in Cambridge is when those buildings are still getting redeveloped. It's just that what happens is instead of doing it in a way that adds new units, they often do like a gut rehab, and then you see that same old building, which looks the same on the outside, but on the inside becomes fully renovated and is selling for $1 million. So that's still happening to some extent. You will still have some amount of displacement in that if you have a building that's being redeveloped, inherently the people who are living there while it's being redeveloped will need to move. And I think that in terms of like that specific case, the, the work that the mayor is doing, Mayor Wu, around tenant displacement and offering incentives and relocation, like I think really, really make a lot of sense. In Cambridge, what we did is that under the new affordable units that are created under the inclusionary program, we give preference to people who are low income and displaced from Cambridge due to redevelopment. So in fact, it's not necessarily a net negative because they still have to move, which is a disruptive pattern, but they go from a place where they might be getting low rent because a landlord is being nice to them in a way that's not guaranteed going to the future, to now getting priority to an inclusionary unit, which will be forever affordable and they will never get displaced out of.
Andrea,
I
did you have
can,
any? Yeah.
yeah, I can just sort of jump on. I think something that Burhan mentioned at the beginning of his remarks that I think is important to remember that if we don't make any changes to the zoning and take no action, then that also doesn't solve our affordability crisis. And we're so deep into this crisis, like Burhan mentioned, things have gotten
Decade.
so bad that we have to start taking steps, but the problem is so large that these steps are not going to immediately fix it. There is no one silver bullet for solving our affordability crisis or totally preventing displacement from happening, because we have sort of fallen so far behind in meeting the housing production goals and just housing needs that we needed to be meeting. And so I think it's important to not let the fear of this not fixing it quite as much as we would like to hold us back from doing anything, and to remember that zoning, like any policy, can be tweaked in the future. And so, you make one step forward and maybe you realize, oh, we should have really done something different. You can change it.